On this week's episode of Where We Are, we'll talk to Politico journalist Adam Wren as he talks us through one of those presidential campaigns that's mystified me a bit. That is the campaign of Mike Pence. And so we'll hear from Adam Wren, one of the foremost authorities on all things Mike Pence. You're listening to Where We Are.
Hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use, and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing, you can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
This is Where We Are. We are the Wares. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
Melissa.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Doing okay.
We've had a terrible twos kind of day, although honestly, I mean, not that it's ever their fault when they're two.
No.
But this really wasn't her fault. Our poor baby got sick. We drove all the way to Fairfax.
Yeah, for a birthday party.
She got sick.
When we got there.
And then we had to drive back. And poor baby, she was just conked out.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I guess the story doesn't make sense unless we actually say that she vomited all over you.
Yeah, she vomited all over me. It was the first time I've ever been vomited on by my children, so I can cross that off of my bingo card.
Yeah. So, but both the kids are now asleep, and you might hear recovering.
a little bit of a cameo from Saoirse during our recording because she came down
during the interview. Yeah. First interview that she's interrupted.
Yeah.
Because I only tucked her in and kissed her goodnight and sang her lullaby one time when she was expecting a repeat performance. Mm-hmm. And so...
She's incorrigible.
Yes. Hey, Melissa, we have a great interview for this episode. Adam Wren, actually, I'm going to have you tell the people about Adam Wren. I'm just going to say, I've mentioned on this podcast a number of times that I'm just a little confused about Mike Pence's run. And so I thought we should have Adam on to help us figure that out. And he does.
Yeah. Yeah. So Adam is the national politics correspondent at Politico, and previously he was a national politics features correspondent for Business Insider and a contributing editor for Indianapolis Monthly. His journalism has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Politico Magazine, the Daily Beast, longreads.com, and longform.org. He's a 3-time finalist for National City and Regional Magazine Association Awards, including Writer of the Year, Best Profile, and Best Feature. So he's covered Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020, as well as Pete Buttigieg in 2020. And now his focus is very much on former Vice President Mike Pence, and that's why we're here today.
Yeah, and Adam's just all-around fantastic guy, great reporter.
Yes.
Glad to be able to talk to him. Here's our interview with Adam Wren. Adam, so good to have you with us here on Where We Are. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm a fan of the podcast. Just finished the John Ward one while I was mowing my grass a couple of weeks ago. So,
good.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah, really good to have you with us. And I've been wanting to have you on the show for, at least a month or so now, because if there are a few people who could help us understand the mystery, the rhyme, the reason of former Vice President Mike Pence's campaign just for and so that's kind of where I want to start off. It was a big lead up into this campaign. He had the book. I felt like he was really sort of trying out a message and had a platform to do it, unlike some of the other candidates. And then he announced, and I still was unclear on some key dynamics of this thing. So Adam, why is Mike Pence running for president?
Well, I think to start off with, the thing that you have to know about Mike Pence is he has wanted to run for president of the United States since he was a little kid. Uh, this is like a widely documented thing about Mike Pence. Matter of fact, his hometown newspaper editor once said that Mike Pence wanted to be president practically since he popped out of the womb. That is a direct quote. So, for starters, like, he wants to do this. He enjoys this. This is something he is the definition of a happy warrior. This is fun to him. He likes to talk to people. He likes to engage people. And this is something he's always wanted to do. So that's really sort of the simplest answer I can give you. Number two, I mean, he really thinks that there is a lane for him, particularly in Iowa, where 2/3 of the caucus goers, as you both well know, are evangelicals. And in many ways, he is the apotheosis of everything the Christian right has wanted in a candidate in 50 years. And yet, at the same time, he's not Donald Trump. And so I think, the Paul Weyrich quote that really stands out to me, I've been thinking about this. It was actually in my colleague's Politico Playbook newsletter a couple of days ago. But, Paul Weyrich, the religious conservative political activist, once said that he would rather have somebody who isn't one of us who thinks that he elected him rather than somebody who is one of us who thinks he did it by himself. And Pence and that quote is the latter.
Yes.
And Donald Trump is the former. And so you're right that there are questions about why Pence thinks he has a lane, but basically it's Iowa, his affinity for and with evangelicals, and the fact that he wants to do this. I mean, for the first time in his life, he's wealthy. He had a multi-million-dollar book deal. This is someone who has lived on a public elected official's salary for 2 or 3 decades. He, is wealthy. His kids are out of the house. He can do this. This is something that he enjoys. And so I think those two factors are why he's doing this.
And how has he been approaching the Trump Pence administration, and how has he been approaching the fact that he's running against the guy that he, kind of infamously was, I mean, every running mate obviously is supporting the top of the ticket, but Pence in very difficult moments, seemingly against his wife's judgment, defended and advocated for Donald Trump to evangelicals. And now he's running, sort of counting on evangelicals, saying, take me over the guy I told you 8 years ago was the one who should be president. How is he dealing with some of those, that tangled web?
Yeah, you're exactly right. McKay Coppins, the great Atlantic writer, wrote that Mike Pence created a permission structure for evangelicals to back Trump. And now he's sort of at the mercy of that permission structure that he created, where Trump's most devout followers and supporters do not like Mike Pence, basically because of what he did on January the 6th. And so, Pence has handled this really, in a fascinating and unexpected way. He had a reputation during the Trump years as someone who kowtowed to Trump, someone who, was very solicitous to him, did did whatever he wanted him to do. And then at his announcement speech in Iowa, he comes out with a pretty fiery announcement speech where he berates Trump, says that Trump has walked away from the cause of life when it comes to abortion rights, says that Trump, is wrong on foreign policy.
Mm.
And for Mike Pence, in a lot of ways, history sort of starts on January 6th. We don't
Yes.
we don't really
Yes.
hear a lot of his disagreements with Trump in the 4 years
Right.
prior to January 6th, which I'm fascinated. That's one of the key things that I'm
Me
going to watch.
too, Adam. Me too.
Yeah. And he has said in an interview with Bret Baier a few months back, he has said, when asked about what it's going to be like to debate Trump or be on the debate stage with Trump, he's told Bret Baier, it wouldn't be the first time that I've debated Trump. It just so happens that it would be in public. And so my question for him is, tell us about all of the times in the White House where you got into it with Trump. Where did you disagree with him? And how did you counsel him on any number of domestic or foreign policy issues? And I think that's the most revealing thing that we haven't heard yet from Pence, even though he's been willing to criticize him on matters related to foreign and economic policy. For instance, he's talked a lot about how Trump shares Biden's position on Social Security. And, but we haven't really heard a lot about the other things he disagreed with Trump about during his 4 years as vice president. So that's the big question mark for me.
How do you think his team is preparing him for the first debate, which is in August?
That's a great question, Melissa. I think that, to be candid, I think that in the debates, Pence is one of the most underestimated candidates on the GOP side. I mean, this is the only person, aside from Trump, who's been in a presidential or vice presidential debate when the stakes are high. He is an accomplished debater. I mean, I think for all intents and purposes, whatever side of the aisle that you're on, you can say that he did a fairly serviceable job in debating Kamala Harris in the vice presidential debate in 2020. I mean, he is the most disciplined political candidate on the national stage today. It's impossible to get him off his talking points. Someone who is a radio host in Indiana for years, who dealt with live call-ins from any number of people. He's good at this. He's good at debate, and so his people tell me that they are really excited about debates with Donald Trump on the debate stage. They think the contrast will be revealing. And what's interesting is, even as someone like Asa Hutchinson, who was a governor when Pence was, and ran into some of the same religious freedom issues that Pence did as governor of Indiana on the RFRA Act, or Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. Asa Hutchinson has said that Trump shouldn't be allowed on the debate stage because of the investigation that's happened with him at the federal level and the indictment. Pence's people don't take that tack. They say, no, we want to debate him. And so I think that first debate later this August is going to be fascinating to watch, particularly that interaction between Trump and Pence.
Yeah, for sure. So we know he's disciplined. We know that he's wanted to be president for a very long time. One of the other things that I wonder about him as well is, we hear about DeSantis all the time, that he's not terribly good at retail politics. How is Pence at retail politics?
That's another fascinating contrast. I was with him in Iowa a few weeks back, the day after he announced at a pizza ranch. There are about 71 pizza ranches in Iowa, and his plan is to visit as many as possible and meeting with voters. He's actually, when you saw him in the vice presidential era, when he served Trump, he had this very stiff demeanor, dour, serious. But when you talk to people who know him, they say that is sort of the outlier, Pence, that really Pence is this nice person, funny, apparently a good sense of humor, I've seen it up close a few times. He's actually really a really good retail campaigner in a way that DeSantis isn't. He likes being with people. He has a
Mm,
really, pastorly effect when he's with people.
mm,
Will put his hand on their shoulder. I watched him once in Iowa about a month ago, where he was working a room of Moms for Liberty members, the group that advocates for education liberty for their students, parental rights activists. And he went up to one person and introduced himself and was asking how they were that day. And he said, I once had a pastor who told me that most people are just under encouraged. And
mm.
just to watch him do that, I mean, he's
Yeah.
he's really engaging. He's kind of one of his aides, longtime aides, once described him to me as kind of your stereotypical sitcom dad, who's a little geeky, a
Yeah.
little dorky, but realizes that about himself. And so, one of the big parts of his campaign is going to be his aides trying to reintroduce him to the public as someone
Right.
who's far different than the Mike Pence that we saw as vice president, the Mike
Okay.
Pence that we knew as congressman for 12 years. I mean, in a lot of ways, Mike Pence is a forerunner of everything that we've seen in national politics over the last decade. I mean, this is someone who was writing about Disney and the movie Mulan and how it promoted, he didn't use this word, but a woke ideology in like a 1990 editorial um,
Right.
for
Mm,
promoting women in the military. And so he's always been a culture warrior before we even had culture wars.
mm,
This is someone who would go on Fox News as the third in line in the House, as John Boehner's lieutenant. And he would go on Fox News, he would go on Hannity and other shows and be the fiery conservative. He opposed George W. Bush's Medicaid expansion. He opposed George W.
mhm,
Bush's no child left behind policy. And so
mm.
he's really sort of an arch conservative in a lot of ways. And a lot, and he'll even tell you this. He likes to say that he was Tea Party before it was cool to be
Right.
Tea Party, and so he's had his finger on the pulse of American politics for a long time. And it just so now happens to be that he's found himself out of step, given what happened on January 6th.
Mm,
That's that's so fascinating. Whether he's a forerunner of the politics of today, or whether the sort of culture war politics today is a rehash of some of, and I do see Pence has something of of a rehash. I mean, he was the Family Research Council's guy
Yeah.
in the mid 2000s. Do you sense that? Um, do you sense that there's uh, do they think that that's what Iowa evangelicals are looking for, and that is going to like win them back from Trump, or does Pence have something up his sleeve? Do you see Pence doing anything sort of out of step with the Pence that we knew as congressman?
I don't. I think in a lot of ways he's trying to remind people of his record as a congressman. And he wants to talk about that in some ways almost more than his record as vice president. Even
mm.
though in
Yeah.
his announcement speech and other parts of his campaign, he said that he's proud of the Trump Pence record. He just wants to deliver that without sort of all the drama.
Mm,
In some ways, I was struck in his announcement speech by how much he sounded like an Aaron Sorkin figure, where he
mm,
said, he's like an Aaron Sorkin Republican in some ways, where he said that, he didn't think that the country was divided as the politics that we see in DC. And I thought that was an interesting reading of the room, because that's not my sense at all of where people are at. But he really struck some Reagan-esque tones
yeah.
in his announcement speech. He cited Reagan a number of times, both in his
Mhm.
launch video and in his announcement speech. And I just don't know. And as a matter of fact, the only thing he quoted more than Reagan was scripture. And I just don't know if that's where the evangelical, base Trump voter is
Yeah,
at. these days. And so I think in many ways his campaign is a fantastic litmus test for what the mood is of the party. Because if they want someone who is above reproach in his personal life, someone who speaks the language of evangelicals, someone who can share his personal testimony on the trail, which he often does. He came to faith at a Christian music concert outside of Asbury in Kentucky back in the 70s. If they want someone like that, he is everything that, I grew up in the Christian, right movement, and everything I learned about what a president should be, that's who Mike Pence is.
And that's who he's made himself to become. Like, it's
right.
so clear that.
That's right.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I mean, this is someone who grew up as a Catholic in an Irish Catholic family, and converted, right around the time where evangelicals started to really gain a foothold in politics, and so it's just utterly fascinating, because really, if voters in Iowa reject him, they're rejecting everything that the Christian right has championed in both personal deeds and public policy for 50 years. So it's
that is so interesting, Adam, and you do get this. I get this sense from his campaign that, like, this all has to count for something. This all has to be like a part of a story God is telling. The difficulties of the Trump years have to be sort of redeemed, and I think Pence wants to, like, make social conservatism honorable again. And it's going to be interesting to see if he's able to do that. I will say he's got some really smart people around him. He has some really bright people around him that are pretty clear-eyed about this whole thing. I just think it is quite a tightrope for him to be on. It's something else, as you noted. I picked up that line from his announcement about we're not as divided as we seem, and it's like you stood back to a president. You stood at the side of a president who seemed pretty intent on making clear how divided we were. So interesting. Anything about the Pence campaign? Melissa wisely noted, the first debate is a month and a half away. About any milestones that you see coming up in the months ahead that we should have our eye on?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see in the next week or so how he's faring in Iowa specific polling. We've actually surprisingly seen and post announcement polling bumps have been rare this cycle because Trump has so much of the voter share. But we've actually seen in the last few days some significant movement for Pence. The last poll I saw, he's at 9%. Behind DeSantis. So he's running a pretty strong third. And really his theory of the case is based on Trump and DeSantis getting locked in a murder-suicide pact, and them sort of taking each other out, and him kind of running up the middle in Iowa. And so, if he continues to see, a polling bounce like this, he's going to surprise people, I think, in Iowa. But he's clear-eyed about his chances too. So I think that's one thing to watch. And the other thing to watch is, can he hit 40,000 donors? He's already met the RNC threshold for, national polls to get on the debate stage, but can he get 40,000 donors in, 20 different states? I think that'll be fascinating to watch. I do think that, he has an outside shot of winning the backing of the Koch network. The Koch network has said that they're going back to playing in presidential politics after sitting out 2020. And they've also said they're not going to be backing Trump. And so this is a political machine that has operatives in all 50 states, that has significant resources from the Koch network. And Mike Pence was their chosen candidate basically to run in 2016 before he ran into trouble in Indiana by passing the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, which critics said would allow businesses to discourage gay and lesbian customers from frequenting their businesses. And so he had that backing once. One of his top advisors, Mark Short, is a former Koch network advisor and employee. And so, we'll know before the end of the year whether Mike Pence has their backing. And if he does, that could be a real turning of the tides. I think Tim Scott is someone who is competing for that same.
Yep. Yeah.
And so it will really be something if he's able to, both increase his voter share in Iowa among evangelicals and get that Koch network backing. That could be something, that changes the tenor of the race.
Yeah. In previous episodes, I've talked about the fact that this race has a number of sort of primaries within the primary, and one of them is between Scott and Haley. You just can't see both of them going to South Carolina. They're not going to risk getting trounced in their own state. It is so. One thing that could be very significant for Pence is, I think Haley is going to perform less well among social conservatives than Scott. If Haley can beat Scott out before Iowa, if somehow Scott decides I'm not even gonna go into the Iowa caucus, then that could be big for Pence, because I do think this is this GOP primary has the fewest candidates who are really cultivating the religious right. I see Scott and Pence really as in terms of the elite level. I think Trump obviously is
Sure.
likely going to do very well. I think DeSantis taps into like the fighter instinct. But in terms of evangelical donors, they like Pence and they like Scott. And so yeah, that's going to be really interesting to see who gets into the race. Yeah, Melissa.
What does Pence have? I mean, there's a lot of like by osmosis, like it's just in general like who he is. But what does his religious outreach look like right now on the campaign? Does he have somebody appointed? Anything
Honestly,
like that?
That's a really great question. He doesn't have someone appointed yet, but in some ways, he's his most effective religious outreach person. I mean, for example, leading up to his announcement, for months now, a big part of his book tour was going to churches on Sundays, large churches in the South and the Midwest, mega churches. And he would speak from the pulpit, from the stage on Sunday mornings about his book and his South. So he knows this world. I mean, when Pat Robertson passed away a couple of weeks ago, he was the first candidate to.
Yes.
I mean, this is someone who visited Ukraine late last year with Samaritan's Purse, the organization of Franklin Graham. He knows the players better than anybody. As an outreach person. Also, Mark Short, his top senior advisor, is an adjunct professor at Liberty University. And so, they are very well skilled in this. I do think that he will, as his campaign expands, I do think that he'll hire someone. And that's, one of the key things that I'll be watching is who's he going to put in charge of reaching out to these people.
Just one other flag, and then I want to ask you about another story that you wrote recently. But if this thing develops, and if Pence is one of the top 2 or 3 candidates, I think both Karen and Charlotte could play really key roles. I think they're weapons in this campaign that other candidates don't have. Charlotte, author, and has become something of a sort of conservative voice for speaking to younger audiences. And then I just think, especially as we've seen sort of parents' rights, education sort of become so central in the GOP primary, Karen Pence seems a pretty ideal person to connect with voters on that.
That's such a savvy observation, Michael. When I was reporting, a few months ago about Pence winding up to this presidential announcement, someone who's been close to Pence for decades told me that Mike Pence is not listening to polls. He's not looking at polls. He's talking. He's reading the Bible. He's praying, and he's talking to his wife, Karen Pence. And so, Karen Pence is his closest advisor. When Mike Pence was governor, she had her own office in the State House.
Yeah, that's
She
right.
had a red phone installed on Mike's desk, where at any time of day she could call this phone and get a hold of Mike Pence. So,
Mhm.
and the note about Charlotte Pence Bond as being pivotal is crucial as well, because she's actually co-authoring a book with her dad, Mike, who his second book is going to be about being a family and how like advice he's learned to raise a family. And Charlotte is going to be writing that with him. Charlotte, let's not forget too, is now a writer for the Daily Wire, which the conservative Ben Shapiro, Nashville-based conservative outlet. And so Charlotte and Karen are going to be instrumental parts of this run. And the first 3 days of Mike Pence's presidential campaign, Karen was by his side, not only at his announcement speech, but at every stop he made in Iowa and New Hampshire. And so she's really his chief political advisor. So we're going to hear a lot from Karen Pence. And there is some, questions about how she felt about the Trump era. A number
Mm.
of books documenting the Trump era had this, infamous scene with Karen Pence that, Pence folks deny ever happened. But basically, Karen was ashen faced, the story goes, when Pence won the vice presidency alongside Trump. And she said, "You got what you wanted, Mike. You got what you wanted." And she
Mm.
was also, said to be very disheartened by the Access Hollywood video, and was almost allergic to Trump for a number of years. And so, uh, where she really is today and where she was at the time is an open, question. And we'll see how she influences Mike, because they're very connected at the hip. They are. She is, in some ways, the most forceful political spouse that we've seen, perhaps since Michelle Obama on the national
Mm.
stage.
Yeah. Hey, before we let you go, Adam, uh, can't let you go without asking you about a story you wrote this last week or so on James Tallarico in Texas. You mind telling us a bit about James? I've followed him for a while, and he's someone who's caught my interest before, but I had not seen such an extensive profile until yours came out. Tell us about James.
Yeah, so James Tallarico is a 34-year-old Texas state representative who is weighing whether to run statewide in Texas in the next few years. He's someone who is actually going to seminary. I sat in on a seminary class with him at a seminary outside of the state capitol in Austin. It's a Austin Presbyterian seminary. He wants to be a pastor. He grew up in a very progressive Presbyterian church outside of Austin. As a matter of fact, his pastor, Jim Rigsby, was someone who was fighting for gay rights in his own church, and was put on trial by the Presbyterian denomination back in the early 90s, which was far ahead of the struggle that we've seen in the church today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So he grew up in a progressive church, brings sort of progressive Christian values to the way that he thinks about legislating in Texas. Was elected as the youngest state lawmaker in Texas at the time, before he even turned 30. Is a couple terms in. He's flipped a Trump leaning district outside of Austin, suburban district, back in the 2018 midterms. And so this is someone people look at in Texas and even nationally. I've had people tell me that he's likely to be a speaker at the DNC next
Mm.
summer. But he has a real knack for distilling his views on scripture and mingling them with policy. And is a real forerunner. This is someone who's advised Beto O'Rourke during his gubernatorial run in 2022 about how to handle debate questions. So he's looked to in the party as someone who's a real thoughtful messenger, not only about Texas issues, but matters of faith and politics. He's gone viral several times over the last couple of months for his interactions with Republicans in the Texas State House during their session, both on issues of gun rights and, the 10 Commandments in, having them displayed in all public classrooms in Texas, which he opposed. And talks a lot about Christian nationalism in interesting ways. And so he's going to be someone, I think, who we're going to see have an impact on politics for a long time.
Yeah, definitely.
Super interesting story. I think it's notable. People like James Mallory McMorrow up in Michigan. It's not a mistake that these figures are rising, and that national Democratic strategists, there's something they like, but we'll maybe unpack that in a later episode. For now, the best you could do is read Adam's profile of James in Politico. Adam is the one to follow for many things in our politics, but I'll read him anything he writes about Pence in the weeks and months ahead. Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
All right, Melissa, I don't know about you, but I feel like I get Pence and his campaign a bit more after that.
Yes,
after that interview.
I definitely do. There were several details that Adam shared that I didn't know about or had completely forgotten about.
Yeah, no, so very helpful. And that Tellerico article, folks should definitely check it out. It's interesting.
Yeah, I love a good profile.
Love a good profile. All right, well, folks, that's all we have for you for this week's episode of Where We Are. As always, would love for you to leave a review. Let people know you listen to the podcast. I'll be back for the Morning 5 this week. I was travel just caught up with me. I missed a few episodes last week. Although I am thinking, Melissa, I can't do that because now our listeners are trained to think that I've broken a bone, that there's something seriously wrong.
It's like I should put out a little 10-second pod just saying, he's okay, people.
Yes. But, yeah, it was just, I was on the West Coast. It was crazy.
You're in Colorado and then California.
Yeah, but I'll be back. I'll be back for the Morning 5 this week. Until then, you've been listening to Where We Are.
Bye.